The church bells rang at exactly 3 p.m., their metallic chime echoing through the vaulted ceiling like a countdown to catastrophe. 200 guests sat in perfect rows, their designer clothes rustling against polished oak pews, their expensive perfumes mingling with the scent of white roses that adorned every surface. But the whispers, those cruel, cutting whispers, they cut through the sacred silence like knives through silk. Charlotte stood at the altar in her ivory gown, a $20,000 masterpiece of French lace and silk organza that now felt like a burial shroud. Her hands trembled as they clutched the wilting bouquet of peonies, petals already beginning to brown at the edges. Through her veil, the world appeared soft and blurred, but she could feel every single pair of eyes boring into her back, judging, pitying, enjoying the spectacle of her humiliation. No one could have predicted what would happen next, a twist so unexpected, so impossibly dramatic, that it would transform this day from the worst moment of Charlotte's life into something she never dared to dream. What began as public devastation would end in a way that defied every expectation, every rule, every logical outcome. But first, she would have to endure the longest hour of her existence. The story you're about to read has an ending so powerful that you'll want to share it with everyone you know. But here's something important. The algorithm only shows the complete story to viewers who truly engage. So do this right now. Hit that subscribe button and write in the comments which city you're watching from. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this unfolds. The finale will leave you breathless, but only if you're part of our community. Subscribe, comment your location, and let's continue this incredible journey together. 63 minutes had passed since the ceremony was supposed to begin. Charlotte had counted every single one, her eyes fixed on the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church, willing them to burst open, willing Marcus to come running down the aisle with some reasonable explanation. An accident, traffic, a misunderstanding. Anything but the truth that was slowly crystallizing in her gut like ice. "Sweetheart," her mother whispered from the front pew, her voice cracking with barely contained anguish. Margaret Bennett had spent 40 years building a reputation as Philadelphia's most composed socialite, but even her iron will was crumbling under the weight of this public disaster. "Maybe we should, perhaps it's time to—" "No." Charlotte's voice came out stronger than she expected. 5 more minutes. But 5 minutes turned to 10, and the whispers grew louder. Someone's phone buzzed, then another. Charlotte watched in horror as guests began glancing at their screens, their faces shifting from confusion to shock to barely concealed glee. The type of glee that feeds on others' misery, the type that would fuel dinner party gossip for months. "Is that him?" someone gasped. "Oh my God, it is. With her." Charlotte felt her knees buckle. She knew. Even before her maid of honor, Jessica, rushed forward with a phone extended, Charlotte knew exactly what she would see. Marcus. Her Marcus. The man she'd dated for 4 years, planned a life with, surrendered her trust to. He was at the airport, his arm around Vanessa, her own cousin, her childhood confidant, the woman who'd been texting her supportive messages just this morning. The photo showed them at the boarding gate, Marcus's hand possessively gripping Vanessa's waist, her head thrown back in laughter, both of them looking carefree and radiant. The caption, posted to Marcus's Instagram just minutes ago. "Sometimes you have to follow your heart, even if it breaks another. Starting our forever. No regrets. True love. Bahamas." The phone slipped from Charlotte's fingers and clattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the church. 200 people watched as she crumpled, her legs giving out entirely, her body folding into itself like a dying swan. She caught herself on the altar rail, her knuckles white against the polished brass, her veil falling forward to hide her face as sobs ripped from her throat. She had never felt so alone, so exposed, so utterly completely destroyed. "Everyone out!" Margaret's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "Thank you all for coming. There will be no ceremony today. The reception is cancelled. Please leave. Now." But they didn't move fast enough. They wanted to see more, to witness the complete breakdown, to collect every detail for their hungry social circles. Charlotte couldn't breathe. The corset of her dress felt like it was crushing her ribs, squeezing the air from her lungs. Black spots danced across her vision. She was vaguely aware of Jessica trying to help her up, of her father's furious voice somewhere in the background, of the organ player nervously shuffling, sheet music. That's when she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from behind the altar. Father Thomas descended the 3 marble steps, his vestments rustling softly. But he wasn't Father Thomas anymore, was he? Charlotte's tear-blurred vision focused on him with difficulty. 3 months ago, he'd left the priesthood. The gossip had been relentless. Whispers about his struggle with celibacy, about his crisis of faith, about how he couldn't reconcile his calling with his very human need for love and companionship. He stood before her now in an impeccable charcoal suit instead of his usual robes. Thomas Alexander Hartford, 42 years old. The 3rd son of the Hartford banking dynasty, a family whose wealth stretched back 5 generations, whose name opened doors across the entire eastern seaboard. He'd rejected all of it at 25 to enter seminary, seeking meaning beyond money. But recently, he'd walked away from the church too, searching for something he couldn't quite name. His dark hair, usually hidden beneath vestments, fell across his forehead. His eyes, had they always been that particular shade of grey, like storm clouds over the ocean, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her forget, just for a second, about the 200 witnesses to her humiliation. "Charlotte," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness. "I know this is insane. I know this is probably the worst timing in the history of terrible timing. But I've watched you for 5 years." The church went absolutely silent, not a breath, not a whisper. Every single person leaned forward unconsciously. "Every Sunday," Thomas continued, stepping closer, "you sat in the 4th pew from the front, right side. You always arrived exactly 10 minutes early. You sang every hymn, even the difficult ones that most people just hummed through. You volunteered for every charity event, every food drive, every fundraiser. You visited Mrs. Patterson in the hospital every single week. After her surgery, you tutored inner-city kids every Thursday evening, and you did it all without ever seeking recognition or praise." Charlotte stared at him, tears still streaming down her face, unable to process what was happening. "I watched you," Thomas said, his voice growing rougher with emotion, "and I felt things a priest should never feel. Admiration, respect, and yes, love. I loved you, Charlotte. I've loved you for years, and it terrified me because I'd taken vows. I'd promised God. So I tried to ignore it. I tried to pray it away. I tried to pretend that what I felt was merely pastoral care, merely brotherly affection." He reached out, hesitated, then gently lifted her veil, pushing it back so he could see her face fully. His thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek with such tenderness that fresh sobs threatened to choke her. 3 months ago, I left the priesthood because I finally admitted to myself that I couldn't live a lie anymore. I couldn't stand at that altar every Sunday, preaching about love and truth while denying my own heart. I couldn't watch you pledge yourself to someone else without at least being honest with myself about what I felt. "Thomas?" Charlotte whispered, her voice breaking on his name. "I'm not asking you to love me back," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel. But Charlotte Bennett, if you're willing, if you're even remotely willing, to take a chance on something real, something honest, something that might actually be true, then marry me. Today." Right now. Let's not waste another moment of life on fear or expectations or what we're supposed to do. Let's just be honest and brave and see where it takes us. The silence stretched so long that Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Behind her, she heard her mother's shocked gasp, her father's confused sputter, Jessica's whispered, "Holy shit." She looked into Thomas's eyes. No, not Thomas. Just Thomas now. Thomas. Hartford. A man who'd given up everything once for God and was now offering to risk everything for her. I don't know you," she stammered. "You know me better than you think," he said softly. "You know I show up every Tuesday at the homeless shelter downtown because I've seen you there. You know I believe in second chances because you've heard me preach about mercy and redemption 100 times. You know I'm patient because you've watched me spend hours counseling troubled teenagers. You know I come from wealth but reject materialism because you've seen me drive a 10-year-old Honda while my brothers collect Ferraris." He paused, then added with devastating honesty, "What you don't know is how your smile could light up the darkest corners of that church. How your laugh during coffee hour could make my entire week worthwhile. How many nights I lay awake praying for the strength to ignore these feelings. How many sermons I wrote and rewrote because I kept getting distracted thinking about you. How utterly, completely, hopelessly in love I am with you." Charlotte felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. Like a door she'd kept locked without even realizing it. Marcus had never spoken to her like this. In 4 years, he'd never once made her feel seen the way Thomas was seeing her right now. Marcus had loved the idea of her, the successful marketing executive, the society princess, the perfect accessory to his perfect life. But had he ever truly seen her? "My family has money," Thomas continued, a wry smile touching his lips. "Obscene amounts of it, actually. My brothers run Hartford Financial. My father practically owns half of Connecticut. I walked away from all of it when I became a priest, but the trust fund is still there, untouched, probably worth around $50 million by now. So I can give you security, stability, a comfortable life. But more than that, more than any of that, I can give you honesty, respect, partnership, and love. So much love, Charlotte. The kind of love that sees you, really sees you." "This is insane," she whispered, but she was smiling through her tears now, a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "This is absolutely insane." "Completely," he agreed, grinning back at her. "But is that a yes?" Charlotte looked past him at the altar, at the flowers, at the 200 guests who were no longer whispering, but sitting in stunned, breathless silence. She thought about Marcus, at the airport with Vanessa, about the 4 years she'd invested in a relationship built on surfaces and expectations. She thought about the life she'd planned, safe, predictable, ultimately hollow. Then she looked back at Thomas, at the raw vulnerability in his eyes, at the trembling hope in his expression, at the absolute courage it must have taken to stand here and lay his heart bare in front of hundreds of people. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. "Yes, Thomas Hartford, I'll marry you. Today, right now. Let's do something completely insane together." The church erupted. Half the guests cheered, the other half gasped in shock. Her mother fainted, actually fainted, and had to be caught by her father. Jessica started laughing and crying simultaneously. And Thomas picked Charlotte up and spun her around right there at the altar, her veil flying out behind her, her train tangling around their legs, both of them laughing like children. "We need an officiant?" Charlotte said breathlessly when he set her down. "Already handled." Thomas gestured to the back of the church, where Father Miguel, his mentor and friend, stepped forward with a knowing smile. "I called him this morning, just in case." "This morning? You planned this?" "I hoped," Thomas corrected, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. I desperately, frantically hoped. The ceremony that followed was nothing like the elaborate production Charlotte had planned. Father. Miguel kept it simple. Traditional vows, no lengthy readings, no performance aspects. Just two people promising to love and honor each other, to face whatever came with honesty and courage. When Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger, his grandmother's ring, a simple platinum band with a single perfect diamond, Charlotte felt a rightness settle into her bones. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not perfection, not safety, but truth. You may kiss your bride, Father Miguel said, his eyes twinkling with barely suppressed joy. Thomas cupped her face in both hands and kissed her with such tender passion that several guests openly wept. Charlotte felt herself melting into him, felt years of armor and pretense dissolving like sugar in rain. This was what love was supposed to feel like. The reception at the Philadelphia Country Club was chaos incarnate. Half the guests didn't know how to react to the dramatic switch, but Thomas's effortless charm and Charlotte's genuine happiness gradually won everyone over. They cut the cake together, laughing, as Thomas dabbed frosting on her nose. They had their first dance to a song hastily queued up by the confused DJ. They toasted with champagne and accepted bewildered congratulations from people who'd witnessed the most unconventional wedding in Philadelphia history. Your cousin tried to reach you, Jessica whispered during a quiet moment, showing Charlotte her silenced phone. 17 missed calls. 23 texts. Apparently Marcus had a panic attack at the airport, and now they're both trying to come back. Block both numbers, Charlotte said without hesitation. She glanced across the room where Thomas was charming her grandmother, making the elderly woman laugh for the first time in years. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The honeymoon phase, everyone warned them, would eventually fade. The initial passion would settle into comfortable routine. But 3 weeks into their marriage, lying in bed in Thomas's brownstone in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood, Charlotte realized the warnings were wrong. This wasn't fading passion. It was deepening intimacy. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Thomas said one morning, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. I wanted to be a painter, Charlotte admitted. Before my father convinced me that art was a hobby, not a career. I have a storage unit full of canvases I've never shown anyone. Show me, he said simply. Today, right now. Show me who you really are, Charlotte, not who you were supposed to be. They spent the afternoon in that dusty storage unit, Thomas sitting cross-legged on the floor while Charlotte nervously unveiled painting after painting. Abstract landscapes, portraits of strangers, experiments with color and light, pieces of her soul she'd hidden away because they didn't fit the mold of a Bennett daughter, a corporate executive, a society wife. These are extraordinary, Thomas breathed, studying a particularly vibrant sunset scene. Charlotte, these are museum quality. They're amateur, they're honest, he interrupted. They're raw and real and absolutely beautiful, just like you. He bought her a studio the next week, a converted warehouse space in South Boston with northern light and exposed brick and enough room for her to spread out and create without boundaries. Charlotte cried when she first walked in, overwhelmed by being seen so completely, by having her hidden dreams valued and supported. Paint whatever you want, Thomas said, pulling her into his arms. Whenever you want. And if you never want to sell a single piece, that's fine too. Create for the joy of creating. Live for the joy of living. But life, as it tends to do, had other plans for their happiness. 4 months into their marriage, Charlotte discovered she was pregnant. The joy was immediate and all-consuming. Thomas literally whooped with excitement and picked her up and spun her around their kitchen until she laughingly begged him to stop before she got dizzy. They told her parents at Sunday dinner, expecting celebration. What they got was Margaret Bennett's pursed lips and Gerald Bennett's uncomfortable clearing of his throat. "So soon?" Margaret asked, her tone carefully neutral but her meaning clear. "People will talk." "Let them talk," Charlotte said, reaching for Thomas's hand under the table. "We're happy. That's what matters." But the complications started at 16 weeks. Bleeding, cramping, emergency room visits that ended with cautious relief but mounting anxiety. The doctors mentioned terms like high-risk pregnancy and mandatory bed rest and potential complications. Thomas became fiercely protective, almost obsessively so. He worked from home, canceled trips, hovered over her like she might shatter at any moment. Charlotte appreciated the love, but sometimes felt suffocated by his fear. "I'm not made of glass," she snapped one evening after he'd tried to stop her from walking upstairs. "I'm pregnant, not dying." "I can't lose you," he said quietly, and the raw terror in his voice stopped her cold. "Charlotte, I waited 42 years to find you. I gave up everything I'd ever known for you. If something happened—" "Nothing's going to happen," she whispered, pulling him close. "We're going to be fine. All three of us." She spoke with more confidence than she felt. At 34 weeks, Charlotte woke up in a pool of blood. The ambulance, the chaos. Thomas's white face and shaking hands as they wheeled her into emergency surgery. The terrifying darkness as anesthesia pulled her under. She woke to beeping machines and the antiseptic smell of hospital rooms. Thomas sat beside her bed, unshaven and hollow-eyed, clutching her hand like a lifeline. When he saw her eyes open, he broke down completely, pressing his face against her palm and sobbing with relief. "The baby?" she croaked through a dry throat. "She's perfect," Thomas choked out. "Our daughter, 6 pounds, 3 ounces, breathing on her own. The doctors say she's strong and healthy and absolutely perfect." Their daughter. Charlotte felt tears sliding down her temples into her hair. "I want to see her." "Soon," Thomas promised. "They're just monitoring her for a few more hours. But Charlotte—" His voice cracked. "You scared me. You were bleeding so much and they rushed you into surgery and no one would tell me anything for hours. I thought I'd lost you. I thought—" "I'm here," she whispered, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had. "I'm right here, Thomas. I'm not going anywhere." They named their daughter Grace Elizabeth Hartford, and the first time Charlotte held her, looking down at that tiny, perfect face, those unfocused eyes already Thomas's exact shade of gray, she understood every cliché about motherhood she'd ever rolled her eyes at. The love was instant and fierce and terrifying in its intensity. "She's going to be so loved," Thomas whispered, his arm around Charlotte's shoulders, both of them gazing at their daughter with wonder. So incredibly, impossibly loved. 6 peaceful months passed. Grace grew strong and healthy, meeting every milestone. Charlotte healed. Thomas balanced work and fatherhood with surprising ease. They moved into a larger house in Cambridge with a yard for Grace to eventually play in, a studio for Charlotte's painting, a home office for Thomas's consulting work. Everything seemed, perfect. Too perfect. The first threatening letter arrived on a Tuesday. Thomas brought in the mail, sorting through bills and advertisements with half his attention, while Grace cooed in her bouncer. He opened the unmarked envelope absently, then went completely still. "What is it?" Charlotte asked, looking up from her easel. Without a word, Thomas handed her the letter. The message was brief but chilling. "You took what wasn't yours. Now I'll take what you love. You should have stayed in your lane, priest." "What the hell?" Charlotte breathed. "Who would send this?" "I don't know." Thomas's jaw was tight, his eyes hard. "But we're calling the police." The police took the report but offered little hope. No fingerprints, generic paper and printer. No way to trace it. They advised caution and promised increased patrols in the neighborhood. The second letter came 3 days later, then a third, each more explicit in its threats, each more detailed in its knowledge of their daily routines. Someone was watching them, following them, learning their patterns. Thomas hired private security, installed cameras, started driving Charlotte and Grace everywhere instead of letting them go out alone. But the fear was a poison slowly spreading through their happiness, turning their home from a sanctuary into a fortress. "This can't go on," Charlotte said one night after Grace had finally fallen asleep. "Thomas, we can't live like this. We have to find out who's doing this." "I've been trying," he admitted, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I've contacted everyone I can think of who might have a grudge. Former parishioners who were angry when I left the church. People I prosecuted back when I was briefly a lawyer before seminary. Even my brothers, in case this is some twisted family grudge. Nothing." "What about Marcus?" Charlotte asked quietly. Thomas looked at her sharply. "What?" "Think about it. The timing, the content of the letters. You took what wasn't yours. What if he means me? What if Marcus found out about your family money and now he's jealous and angry and—" "That's insane," Thomas interrupted. But his expression suggested he was already considering the possibility. They hired a private investigator. Within a week, they had their answer. Marcus wasn't behind the letters, but Vanessa was. The investigator's report laid it all out in clinical detail. Vanessa had married Marcus 3 months after the disaster at the airport, convinced she'd secured a wealthy future. But Marcus's success had been mostly smoke and mirrors, massive debt, failed businesses, crushing credit card bills. Within months, Vanessa found herself trapped in a suffocating marriage to a man she didn't love, watching Charlotte's social media posts showing a life of genuine happiness and actual wealth. The envy had festered into obsession, then obsession into malice. "She's unhinged," the investigator said, showing them photos of Vanessa outside, their house lurking across the street, following them to the grocery store. "And she's escalating. The letters are getting more detailed, more threatening. Honestly, I think you should consider a restraining order, at minimum." Charlotte stared at the photos of her cousin, once her friend, once someone she'd trusted with her deepest secrets. The face in these images was twisted with rage, unrecognizable from the girl who'd braided her hair at sleepovers and been her bridesmaid at her almost wedding. "What do we do?" she whispered. Thomas's expression had gone cold and calculating. "We end this. Permanently." The Hartford Family Charity Gala was one of Boston's premier social events, attended by politicians, business leaders, and old money families whose names were carved into the city's foundations. Thomas hadn't attended in years, but this year he made an exception. He made sure Vanessa and Marcus received invitations, made sure they knew the event was black tie and exclusive, made sure Vanessa understood this was her chance to see exactly what she'd missed out on. "Are you sure about this?" Charlotte asked the night of the gala, adjusting Thomas's bow tie. She wore a midnight blue gown that made her look like a goddess, her confidence radiating after months of fear. Grace was safely with her parents for the evening, surrounded by security. "Trust me," Thomas said, kissing her forehead. "Tonight we take back our peace." The grand ballroom of the Four. Seasons sparkled with crystal chandeliers and champagne. Charlotte stayed close to Thomas as they worked the room, greeting his family, accepting congratulations on Grace's birth, presenting the perfect picture of happiness and stability. When Vanessa and Marcus entered, Charlotte felt Thomas's hand tighten on her waist. Vanessa wore a dress that was trying too hard, too revealing, too flashy, too desperate. Marcus looked uncomfortable in an ill-fitting tux, already sweating despite the air. Conditioning. "Let them come to us," Thomas murmured. "They won't be able to resist." He was right. Within 20 minutes, Vanessa was making her way over, Marcus trailing reluctantly behind. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "Charlotte," Vanessa cooed, air-kissing both her cheeks. "How wonderful to see you. And father, Thomas, still getting used to that." "Vanessa," Charlotte said evenly. "Marcus, what a surprise." "Oh, we wouldn't miss it," Vanessa said, her eyes roaming the, room hungrily. "Such a lovely event. Though I'm sure it must be difficult for you, Charlotte, attending these things now. You've always been more comfortable at gallery openings and charity auctions than real high society events." The barb was subtle but clear. Charlotte felt Thomas's thumb rubbing soothing circles on her hip. "Actually," Thomas said smoothly, "Charlotte's been attending events like this her entire life. Her family and mine have been friends for generations. Haven't they, Mother?" Patricia Hartford materialized beside them, as if summoned, her diamonds glittering like ice. "Oh, yes. Margaret Bennett and I went to Wellesley together. Charlotte practically grew up at our summer house in the Cape." She smiled at Vanessa with polite coldness. "I don't believe we've met?" Vanessa's smile faltered. "I'm Charlotte's cousin, Vanessa." "Ah, yes." Patricia's tone suggested she knew exactly who Vanessa was and found her wanting. "How lovely. Do excuse me. I see the senator has arrived." The night continued like that. 1,000 tiny cuts as Vanessa realized she was completely outclassed. Charlotte moved through the room with effortless grace, knowing everyone, beloved by everyone, clearly belonging in a way Vanessa never would. Thomas kept her close, introducing her as "my brilliant wife, the artist," showing her off with obvious pride and adoration. But the real blow came during the speeches. Thomas took the stage, handsome and confident, the microphone catching his voice perfectly. "Thank you all for coming tonight. As many of you know, I spent 15 years as a priest, serving the community in various capacities. When I left the church, I struggled with my sense of purpose. I'd defined myself by service for so long that I didn't know who I was without it." He paused, his eyes finding Charlotte in the crowd. "But then I found something more valuable than any vocation. I found love. True, honest, courageous love. My wife Charlotte showed me that serving others doesn't require robes or vows. It requires only a genuine heart and a willingness to show up. She teaches inner-city kids art every week. She volunteers at 3 different shelters. She donates half her painting profits to women's causes. And she does it all without ever seeking recognition." The room erupted in applause. Charlotte felt her cheeks flush as hundreds of approving eyes turned toward her. "But tonight," Thomas continued, "I want to address something darker. For months, my family has been terrorized by threatening letters that contained intimate details about our lives, that threatened our infant daughter, that made my wife afraid to leave our home." The applause died instantly. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. "I hired investigators," Thomas said, his voice hardening, "and we discovered the source, someone who claimed to love Charlotte, someone who was once trusted as family, someone whose jealousy and malice transformed her into something unrecognizable." He nodded to the back of the room, where 2 police officers entered, followed by the private investigator carrying a large folder. "Vanessa Taylor, née Bennett," Thomas said, looking directly at her frozen face. "You've been stalking my family for 6 months, making terroristic threats, trespassing on our property. We have photographs, videos, forensic evidence linking you to the letters and witness testimony." Vanessa's face drained of all color. Marcus looked frantically between his wife and the approaching officers, clearly having no idea what was happening. "You can come quietly," Thomas said, "or you can cause a scene. Either way, you're under arrest." The room held its collective breath as Vanessa stood there, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Then something broke in her expression, a kind of unleashed fury that transformed her face into something ugly and raw. "You don't deserve her!" Vanessa screamed, pointing at Charlotte with a shaking hand. "You stole her from Marcus. You manipulated her when she was vulnerable. You're just a failed priest who couldn't keep his vows and couldn't handle real life." "That's interesting," Thomas said calmly, "considering you're the one who stole Marcus while Charlotte was waiting at the altar. But projection is a common psychological defense mechanism." "I loved you," Vanessa spat at Charlotte, tears streaming down her face now. "You were my best friend, my family, and you threw it all away for him, for money, for status. You became everything you said you'd never be." "No," Charlotte said, standing up and walking toward her cousin with her head held high. "I became honest. I stopped pretending. I stopped living for other people's expectations. And yes, I found someone who loves me for exactly who I am, not who they want me to be. That's not something to apologize for, Vanessa. That's something to celebrate." "You ruined my life." "You ruined your own life," Charlotte said, sadly. "You made choices, Vanessa. You chose to betray me. You chose to marry Marcus. You chose to let jealousy consume you, and now you have to live with the consequences." The police moved in then, gently but firmly guiding Vanessa toward the exit. Her screams echoed through the ballroom as she struggled, as Marcus stood frozen and useless, as 300 of Boston's elite watched the spectacular downfall of someone who'd tried to climb social ladders she was never equipped to scale. When the doors closed behind them, cutting off Vanessa's fury mid-shriek, the silence was profound. Then Thomas's brother Richard started clapping. Slowly, others joined in until the entire room was applauding Charlotte's courage, her grace under pressure, her refusal to be victimized. Thomas descended from the stage and pulled Charlotte into his arms, holding her close as she finally let herself shake with the aftermath of 6 months of fear and tension. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "She can't hurt us anymore." "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia Hartford's voice cut through the applause, "I believe this calls for champagne. To Charlotte and Thomas, may they have nothing but happiness from this day forward." The toast was universal. And as Charlotte looked around the room at all these powerful people who'd witnessed her vulnerability and chosen to honor it rather than exploit it, she felt something shift in her chest. Not just relief, but belonging. True belonging. Later, that night, after they'd returned home and paid the babysitter and checked on sleeping Grace, Charlotte and Thomas lay in bed, tangled together, exhausted but exhilarated. "Thank you," Charlotte whispered, "for protecting us, for ending it, for being exactly who you are." "Always," Thomas promised, kissing her temple. "Until the end of time." 1 year later, Charlotte stood in her studio, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, paint smeared on her fingers, and joy radiating from every cell. Her latest exhibition had sold out in 3 hours, with critics praising her raw emotional honesty and fearless vulnerability. But the best part wasn't the success, or the money, or the validation. It was the freedom, the permission to be completely, authentically herself. Through the window, she could see their backyard. Thomas was lying on a blanket under the oak tree, Grace toddling around him on chubby legs, laughing as she discovered dandelions and grass and all the small wonders of the world. His eyes followed her every move, protective but not stifling, loving but not possessive. Charlotte thought about Marcus sometimes, about the life she'd almost lived. The private investigator had told them he'd declared bankruptcy 6 months after Vanessa's arrest and had moved back in with his parents. Vanessa was serving 18 months for stalking and harassment. Sometimes, Charlotte felt pity for both of them. But mostly, she just felt grateful. Grateful for being left at the altar. Grateful for humiliation that opened doors to truth. Grateful for Thomas's impossible courage. grateful for second chances and honest love and brave leaps into unknown territory. Grace spotted her in the window and waved both hands frantically, yelling, "Mama! Mama!" with pure, uncomplicated joy. Thomas looked up too, his face transforming into that smile he saved only for her, the one that said she was his entire world, his greatest adventure, his most sacred blessing. Charlotte waved back, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The abandoned bride, the desperate priest, the impossible wedding. Looking back, it all seemed inevitable, like the universe had been gently pushing them toward each other all along, just waiting for them to be brave enough to listen. She returned to her canvas, adding final touches to a painting of a church at sunset, light streaming through stained glass, shadows and illumination dancing together. She titled it Grace, for her. Daughter, yes, but also for the undeserved gift of second chances, for the mystery of finding love in unexpected places, for the courage to say yes to possibility even when logic screams no. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Say yes to what's real. Yes to what's honest. Yes to love that sees us completely and chooses us anyway. Charlotte had said yes on the worst day of her life, and it had led her to the best days she'd ever known. Sometimes the ending you planned isn't the ending you needed. Sometimes being left behind is actually being set free. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who saves you is the one you never saw coming. If this story touched your heart, leave a subscription and let me know in the comments how you'd rate it from 0 to 10. Every story deserves to be heard, and every ending deserves witnesses. Thank you for being here for this one.